let's not do that exact thing if we can help it.
That is an amazing tagline for a movie.
Yeah.
Let's not do that exact thing. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 6 of Cinemaball. Did you miss us? I know you did. I am here with my co-host and opponent, Carolyn Petit. Hey, Carol.
Hey.
Cinemaball is a ridiculous excuse for Carolyn and I to talk about movies. Carol's goal in the game of Cinemaball is to connect one movie to another through an actor, director, or somebody else until she gets us to, and I can't believe I agree to this, the 1998 Jean-Claude Van Damme film Knockoff. I'm on desperate defense. I am doing everything in my power to stop that from happening. Last week, it was 2 weeks ago now, Carolyn strapped the Cinemaball to Danny DeVito's back and shifted it from the 1997 crime classic LA Confidential to the Robert Zemeckis 1984 romantic adventure Romancing the Stone. At the end of this episode, I will announce our next film, but for right now, it's time to seek riches and romance. Carolyn, kick things off for us.
All right, so it's the 1984 romantic adventure Romancing the Stone, which there's a good chance that this film sort of came into existence because of the success maybe a year or two prior of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think people saw an appetite in audiences for kind of classic kind of swashbuckling adventure films.
Yeah.
And so, Romancing the Stone is much more, I would say, of a romance than Raiders of the Lost Ark is in some ways, but definitely also kind of has that quality of like hearkening back to the classic adventure serials of the maybe like the 40s and stuff, right? Also, it's Robert Zemeckis's first sort of big box office success. Robert Zemeckis, of course, would go on to direct the following year. He would direct Back to the Future. He's also gone on since to direct films such as Forrest Gump, Contact, Castaway, and of course Beowulf.
Right.
Okay. So the basic, just to set up the basic plot of this film before we get into talking specifics. Kathleen Turner plays a romance novelist named Joan Wilder, the Joan Wilder, whose sister somehow gets like, I love how little concern this film has for even like explaining how people wound up in these situations.
Oh,
and
yeah,
for so many other things, but we'll get to that more a bit later. Her sister, Elaine, I think. Her sister is her sister's husband has just been killed in Colombia, and but before he died, he sent a treasure map to Joan in New York, and now Elaine is basically being held ransom for the treasure map. So Joan hops on a plane to Colombia in an effort to deliver the treasure map to her sister's captors, rescue her sister. Along the way, she's beset by misadventure. And she encounters a man named Jack T. Colton. Played by Michael Douglas. And the two sort of there's sparks between them. There's a lot of tension, and between them, they're very different people. They fight, they argue, they can't stand each other, they really like each other, that sort of thing. And and then anyway, the treasure map leads to a gem called El Corazon, and Jack wants to get the gem. Probably mainly for himself, but ostensibly to give Joan the added leverage she might need to bargain for her sister's life. Joan sort of leans toward just taking the map to save her sister. Anyway, so that's kind of the setup for most of the film. But so I want to talk about how the film begins.
Yes.
So it starts with a sequence. So Joan is finishing up the latest in her series of novels about her romantic heroine named Angelina, and so you have Joan, Kathleen Turner, doing voiceover on this opening sequence that is it's part of her novel. It's the conclusion of her latest novel, and it's set in the Old West, and in an interesting sort of cinematic choice. It's very clear, like this deliberate cinematic choice. You never see Angelina's face like too clearly. It's like deliberately either obscured or just not shown in close up. Like you kind of see her from a distance, but you never get a good look at her. And I mean, it's just an interesting choice. And I was thinking, well, maybe that is because, women who read romance novels of this sort of like to project themselves onto that character. And so the sort of choosing to not show her face is a kind of cinematic recognition of that as like, here is like this romantic heroine who ideally the female reader of Joan's novels would, see herself as, perhaps.
Right. I think that's absolutely what's going on, because then we also see, just after that opening sequence, we see that, blown up shot of various, covers of Joan's, decorating her apartment. And we learn that the character of Jessie, who's been this sort of like romantic hero that she's been wrestling with in her fiction and in her imagination for years, as kind of the, the perfect romantic hero. And his face is also obscured.
Yeah.
We don't see it in the opening sequence, nor do we see it on the book covers themselves.
Right.
And the idea is that both, Joan and Jack, can be slotted into those romantic roles. I found it absolutely fascinating as a romance reader myself and occasional romance writer attempter. I was really interested in the way this initial sequence unfolded, because there is absolutely still, despite the fact that the romance industry is what has continued to prop up the publishing industry as a whole, it far outsells any other genre or type of book, right? Despite that, because it is associated with women and women's tastes, it is continually denigrated and dismissed, as fluff, as not literarily worthy, as, some sort of, panacea for women who, want like brooding alpha males, but who are themselves lonely, unattractive, half feral people who live with cats or whatever, right? So I liked the way that the film opened, and you get just a hint that what's important about these fantasies, because they absolutely are fantasies, is that they do allow women to see themselves in starring roles, right? So it's not Angelina being rescued, it's Angelina rescuing herself, in this very boss, badass way.
Yeah. So, she throws a knife into the heart of this man who has wronged her and tormented, her and presumably, plenty of other people for decades. So, I really love myself. I love the moment where we cut from the fantasy. It's like, Angelina and Jessie run into each other's arms. They kiss. There's the Joan says something like, I knew from that moment, the moment our lips met, that we would never be apart again. And then we cut to Joan herself, Kathleen Turner. And I mean, Kathleen Turner is, certainly like a very attractive woman. But in this first shot, like, I loved how not, glamorous she looks. She doesn't appear to be wearing makeup. She's, her hair is kind of a mess. She's wearing like flannel, just a flannel top, and she's, she's crying, I think, over her own, the ending of her own book. And it's just like, And it's just like, for me, as I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, here's the woman I can actually relate to. I can actually project myself onto, because she does live alone with her cat. She celebrates the finishing of the book, like, by feeding her cat, like, and she puts a little garnish on the cat's food and everything, and we do sense that for all of her success as in the world of romance writing, that she's she doesn't have it all together, right? I mean, she's like, she falls asleep on the couch, and then, she wakes up, and when the phone rings, and it's like, oh my God, is that the time? Like, she has to, like, scramble out the door to meet with her publisher. And so I appreciate the way that the film sets up very deliberately that immediate kind of contrast between the fantasy woman that a lot of us maybe wish we could be, or project ourselves into being in fictional and pure fantasy scenarios, and then the more realistic kind of image of this woman. Yeah,
the question that kept popping up for me in this film is, whose fantasy is it? Who is meant to watch and enjoy this picture? Because, as you say, this film is absolutely, like, we have this film and then its sequel, Jewel of the Nile, and apparently we almost had a film called Crimson Eagle that never got filmed. Thank God. Yeah. Which is the Jack and Joan and, like, their two teenage kids, probably just looting in Thailand somewhere. But I am interested in whose fantasy this is. It absolutely is a white person's fantasy, right?
Oh,
like,
my
this
God.
Movie is
so
ridiculously racist.
We will absolutely, like, so incredibly racist.
And in a way that, the Indiana Jones movies absolutely are also incredibly racist, right? And it's very interesting to watch a film like this. Like, Robert Zemeckis is an incredibly talented director, and you and I are of a similar age. And so there was a time, when we were kids, when the name Robert Zemeckis, was sort of constantly in cultural conversation, right? Like, that was a director that you knew.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a name that was very familiar. And so I'm watching this film, which I don't recall having seen all the way through in the 80s, but I certainly recall liking the parts that I did see in the 80s. But watching it now and being like, this is a very competent, entertaining film that absolutely I do not like.
Yeah, I mean, well, so it's, it's interesting to think about whose fantasy is it? It's trying to be, I want to say everyone's fantasy, but by that I mean like the average white male and white female moviegoer's fantasy. Because I mean, like, so Angelina, that moment in the opening sequence where she kills her sort of tormentor, it's the thing is that what's happening in that moment is that it's like a prelude to rape, really. Like, he is and she, because he's, like, seduced by her beauty, she is able to kind of take advantage of that and throw the knife into his chest and catch him at unawares. But, like, that kind, and a lot of times men particularly will see a moment like that in a film and think, oh, that's like empowering. And a lot of women too, who don't have like I think a real feminist framework or ethic, will also to some degree feel that way. But the reality is, of course, that's what I think it was Adichie in her book, like, We Should All Be Feminists. Like, it's what she would call in that context, quote unquote, bottom power, which is a power that it's the kind of power that comes specifically from being, like, sexually objectified or from being, like, on a lower rung. And it's also a power that it places women in competition with other women, because it's only women who patriarchy and who men deem like worthy, who like physically of that kind of attention, can have that kind of power. So it's certainly not a liberating power for women as a class. In fact, it is dependent on the subjugation of women more broadly.
Yeah, although it's very interesting, you know. So as I said, I am a dedicated, hardcore, long-time romance reader, and have dabbled in trying to write it, and I'm hopelessly bad at it. So don't worry, feminist frequency listeners. I will, despite the fact that I'm ready to offer you most of my writing at a moment's notice, I will never force you to read my hackneyed romance writing. But there's a way in which the romance genre, more than any other, reckons with the reality of how women process their socialization and how they do find power there. So you're absolutely right that, you know, it perhaps is not as progressive or as liberatory as it is framed, but the fact that it does, you know, offer some measure of thinking through what happens, right?
100%. I'm absolutely not saying that it cannot be cathartic or that it cannot be very valuable as an escape or as a certainly. But I'm just saying that if our notions of female liberation are like limited by those notions, then we have a very serious problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's interesting for historians of romance, when they plot the kind of, you know, family tree and genealogy of the modern romance genre, one of the things that people continue to point out with, you know, it kind of like looking at, you know, that uncle no one wants to talk about, is the way that romance in the 70s and 80s specifically, so during the time that this movie comes out, had a really gross, and it wasn't even an undercurrent, but like overcurrent of really terrible, like rape as love narratives, right? And so, you know, I think there's a conversation that absolutely could be had about the gross version of toxic masculinity that obtained during that period in certain segments of the romance genre, whereby, you know, desire was communicated by rape, you know? And this was, you know, sanctioned by people for far too long, you know? Anyways, whatever. That gets away from my absolute main comment about this movie, which was my profound dissatisfaction with the fact that I did not get to hear the Eddie Grant song, Romancing the Stone.
I know,
I played the credits all the way through, waiting to hear it, and it never came up. And so then I Googled it and found out that apparently there's only like a very short snippet that makes into the movie, because apparently there were some creative differences between Eddie Grant and the producers or whatever. But I was looking forward to that the entire time.
I got my memories, my MTV memories of the era mixed up. And the song that I kept waiting for was
When the Going Gets Tough.
So, when the going, the tough get rough, you know. I'll climb any mountain.
That's right.
And like that. So, which I guess is actually from the sequel, Jewel of the Nile.
Yeah.
But that had like a video. So that video was all over MTV at the time, and it has Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner and Danny DeVito in like dancing and like playing saxophone or whatever. And it's just like, so that image was so burned into my memory. I'm like, that song is definitely from this movie, but it's not. So that was my big disappointment with this film.
Absolutely. And in fact, I watched the movie with my partner, and then, you know, after the whole, like, I seriously sat there watching through the credits, waiting for Romancing the Song to come up. It never happened, so I had to Google it and then watch it on YouTube.
Yep.
And that, like you, I immediately was like, oh, well, do I actually want to hear When the Going Gets Tough by Billy Ocean?
Yeah.
And watch that video. And my partner was just dumbfounded, because he was like, Michael Douglas looks like he was really into being in this video. Like, he's like, I don't get it, I don't understand it, but he looks like he is really into being one of Billy Ocean's backup dancers. Good. So I would like for Michael Douglas to weigh in here. Was that the highlight of your movie, of the promo tour for Jewel of the Nile? Have you seen Jewel of the Nile?
I have, but it was probably like in '88 or something, and I only saw it the one time. I've seen Romancing the Stone many times, including, for whatever reason, it's one of the very few films that I have vivid memories of being dragged to the theater with my parents and seeing, like, actually in the theater. For whatever reason, a particular line, because I'd never heard, like, when there's the bus crashes into Michael Douglas's Jeep, and he says, a little bit later, says, "My Jeep is totaled," which I'd never, to my 8-year-old me, like I was like, what does that mean? And I was so fascinated with that use of the word total. And so for what that's like my memory of my movie going experience is like becoming interested in that language and like that use of the word total or totaled.
That's interesting that you have this memory because, I also watched this, or at least parts of it, as I say, when I was a kid. But my memory of this was that this was an adult movie. And I don't know if it was one of those weird instances. My family, and I've written about this on the site, had wildly inconsistent like personal rating systems when it came to things that I could or could not watch. And so sometimes they would be like, no, this is too adult for you, like because of the language or sexual situations or whatever. And other times they just, were like, sit down, enjoy it, we'll explain it later if we get around to it, right? But I remember clearly Romancing the Stone being in the category of like, no, this is the kind of movie that like my mom and dad watch. But I can't watch it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, I saw so many other horrifyingly inappropriate things when I was the exact same age. But so for the longest time in my head, I was like, oh, Romancing the Stone is a very adult, comedy. And in a way, it is, like there's
there's like marijuana jokes and
I don't even mean like jokes that are but I mean like kind of the sensibility of it is very adult. It's not silly in a way. There are definitely silly situations in it.
Danny DeVito's whole character is silliness, pure silliness.
Danny DeVito brings the Danny DeVito magic in this film. So good.
Yeah.
So good. Like he never fails to deliver. Yeah. But it's not, foolish or it's not cartoonish in a way, so yeah, I definitely had this slotted in my mind as like, oh, this is an adult comedy. It's not at all an adult comedy, but I probably resisted watching it even once I could as a kid because I was like, oh, this is something my parents would like.
Right, totally. So we've talked a bit about like how the film thinks about and looks at women and femininity and fantasy. I want to talk just a bit about some of what it does around masculinity. So, obviously in Joan's mind and in her books, Jesse, this figure is lifted up as like the kind of the perfect man. He's obviously brave and bold and adventurous and all of these things. And so then you get this scene where Joan and her publisher are out, just drinking or whatever, and there's all these men in the restaurant, and it's this kind of, judgment of I guess New York sort of yuppie men of the early 80s, where she just goes down the line and she's like, what are the words she's using? Like, loser, wimp, loser. Like, clearly these men.
Mondo Dismo.
Yeah. What even is that? Like, I never.
It was such a quintessentially like 80s sounding word, right? Like Mondo Dismo.
So like these men are clearly they're not man enough.
Manly.
They're not man enough. And then so later you have a scene in which Joan is sort of chastising Jack for not being a quote-unquote real man, because he's clearly been a bit kind of scheming and underhanded, perhaps, in like wanting, I think, to get the stone. So she's saying all these things of like, a real man is considerate, a real man is kind, a real man is this, is this, is this. And what happens in that moment is that Jack gets, of course, to demonstrate to her and to us, the viewers, just how much of a quote-unquote real man he is by like taking out his knife and cutting off the head of a snake that was just about to attack Joan, exactly as she's railing about how much Jack is not quote-unquote a real man.
Right.
So it's
the way that her kind of encapsulation of what a real man is this, sort of juvenile kind of Boy Scout, like, real man
exactly.
is helps a woman across the street
Yeah.
and, you know, is always prepared and whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and the way he gives the lie to that. But, you know, the moment when he strikes out with his machete against the snake is when she says, like, you know, you aren't even paying attention to me. Like, can you even look at me? You're being so rude, right? And then he chops off the head of the snake and whatever. And it was kind of gross, right?
Sure.
It's this very dismissive, like, you know, you should be willing to put up with all manner of bad behavior because ultimately what matters is the kind of virility, you know, of the man, of the masculine.
Right.
You know?
I mean, it's very...
like ultimately the one true characteristic that you need to be concerned with is kind of his physical potency.
That and I do think there's a bit of that, like, the sort of Han Solo, you know, women actually like men who are a bit of a scoundrel kind of thing. Like, you may say you don't want that. You may say you want a man who's totally, like, forthright and honest and whatever. But come on, ladies. Like, you actually want a bit of a bad boy.
Right. You know, that's actually one of the reasons why I was, you know, tentatively hopeful at the beginning when we have that that scene from Jones' novel, which is Savage Spirit or whatever the fuck it is. You know? So, you know, when she dispatches Grogan, you know, the meanest, dirtiest, stinkiest, you know, son of a bitch, this side of the Pecos or whatever she says, you know, she gets away from him, but then his brothers are coming after her. And that's when we're introduced to Jesse because, you know, then Jesse appeared on the horizon and she says, like, Jesse is the one man who, you know, understood and the one man she could trust. And I was like, yeah, I kind of love this idea that she's putting these two versions of masculinity against each other. Because it seemed as if the character of Jesse, what was going to be important about him is that he wasn't, you know, kind of overwhelmingly masculine gross, you know, but that he was caring and that she was able to invest this trust in him. So to have Joan, you know, in quotation marks, in real life, respond to Colton's kind of, you know, thuggish, you know, obviously the film tries to have it both ways and that, you know, it's revealed that he's not purely a scoundrel. He does, you know, have deeper feelings, you know, like he does have a heart of gold. Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how racist this movie is.
Oh yeah, that was exactly what I was going to lead us to next. Like, so the bulk of the movie is set in Colombia. It actually, I think most of it was filmed in Mexico, but set in Colombia. So, yeah.
I am wondering how much of this film is brownface, because as I was watching the credits, waiting for my Eddie Grant fix, right? I'm watching the names scroll by of Zolo's men. So Zolo is the primary antagonist, and the names alone obviously cannot tell us anything. It was just that in the aggregate, all of the actors who played Zolo's men had, you know, what I would call Western names, right?
I noticed that
and
too.
I was like, were none of these dudes, you know, from Colombian clearly not Colombian, but they shot it in Mexico. Were any of these dudes actually Mexican actors?
Right.
Or was it all like white dudes in the background playing his henchmen?
So you from the very beginning, it starts creating this sense of Colombia as a place of absolute peril for white people. It is white people in brown peril because you have this scene. So you have Elaine, Joan's sister, who, like, I don't know, she leaves her apartment or her hotel or whatever. And this kid, this fucking, like, 12-year-old kid or something, he's like a master of the bolas, you know, and he, like, you just see him he notices her and he just starts spinning the bolas, or I think is what it's called, and then, like, lets it fly, and it just, like, of course, gets Elaine right around the neck, and she's incapacitated, and then the kid hops in this, like, beautiful red sports car and delivers her to Ira and Ralph.
Yeah.
The Danny DeVito character and his cousin, Ira, who, like, so it's interesting because they're obviously criminals as well, but they're totally presented as, like, comic relief criminals. Where, you know, and not, like, menacing at all in the way that the brown people are presented. Like, the brown people are presented as truly, like, menacing and dangerous. it's like the Danny DeVito character is actually almost just seems like this hapless fool who kind of wound up working with his cousin Ira, but obviously really dislikes Ira and doesn't feel good at all about what they're doing, so you kind of have like all this sympathy for the Danny DeVito character.
Yeah.
Whereas Zola is just this absolute like stone cold killer menace, who also has like the power of, I think, the Colombian state behind him.
Right.
Like somehow he's like tied, he's like in the military police or the secret police. I don't know what he is exactly.
It is part of this just like, ridiculous and overblown, 1980s American fantasy of the lawless South America,
yes.
right? It feeds into this cultural narrative that was, promoted throughout the media, and from the White House administration of the time of this like sort of, backwards, underdeveloped, morally depraved region in which, as you say, white people could not trust that they would survive merely stepping off a plane into this place that, like Joan gets out of the airport, and the airport it's dirty, it's filthy.
Yeah.
They're like naked children running around. It's loud, it's bestial, in comparison to the New York, this hyper civilized New York.
I mean,
right?
and when you're in New York, you get that smooth, jazzy Alan Silvestri score, and it's just like, oh yeah, we're in New York right now. Drink some champagne and
you would be forgiven for thinking she had stepped back in time entirely, which is exactly what the movie suggests, right? Like there's a way in which these films, so Romancing the Stone takes place, it's released in the 80s, it's set in the 80s, unlike Raiders of the Lost Ark, which comes out in 81, but is set in the 30s. But nevertheless, the wallpaper of these exotic foreign lands is always cited in the past, no matter when the movie is set, right? And that's part of the reason, that's part of the excuse that the white heroes have for, pillaging and just adventuring through these countries. Is because like the poor, simple-minded peasants who live there don't even really know what they have. They are so consumed with just survival if they are poor, or kind of these like rapacious tyrannical regimes oppressing the common man, that none of them are legitimate owners of the treasure. Like these places are essentially just like giant treasure boxes for the white people who choose to to fly in and take it over, right? So there was a point very quickly into this film where I was just like, I am actively rooting against every white person in this movie, which is not to say that I am rooting for Zolo, but I was like, at least he will keep El Corazon in the country. Like it's just like, I don't want Joan and Jack to be successful. I bear no ill will towards Ira and Ralph. They're these kind of like chucklehead con artists, but they don't really want to hurt anybody. They just want to get their antiquities and go, But Joan, and she sort of, it was like a cruise commercial, right? Where a harried, suburban family makes their way to Jamaica or something, and they start to let their hair down. That is literally what happens to Joan, right? She begins the film with her hair up in a bun, and as the film progresses, it slowly starts to come down and then out, signifying the increased freedom that she has found through this adventure. And the way that she has done this is through treating this entire country like a playground.
Yeah.
And these people like toys.
Exactly. Well, at one point, Joan and Jack are, they are in need of, or they want a car to progress, on their journey. And so they go to this like village, and in the village they are pursued by like an extremely sort of obviously coded to be very kind of menacing, threatening group of men, and they go to the one like mansion or in the village, And they're also greeted by a gun, basically. They're told to beat it, to hit the road. And so that figure too is presented as very, threatening. But then so the one, oh my God. So Jack, he says as they're leaving or trying to get out of the situation, he says something to. He says Joan's name. He's like, well, what do we do now, Joan Wilder or whatever? And immediately the man in the house, is just turns on a dime, his whole demeanor, right?
Yeah.
He's like, Joan Wilder? The Joan Wilder? And, it turns out that this drug lord is a huge fan of her books. And so then Juan becomes this, like, in the film, this figure of jubilance and play, and they have they have good times together. They escape in his massive truck together from the pursuit of Zola's men. But the actor who plays Juan is Alfonso Arau, who is it's unfortunate in my mind that the roles that I can associate him with primarily in my mind are both of these kinds of extremely stereotypical negative portrayals. It's this and the other one for me is El Guapo, the goofy Mexican tyrant villain of Three Amigos. And it's Alfonso Arau is I don't know that he's active anymore, but also was a filmmaker. He directed Like Water for Chocolate.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah,
Then
he directed Like Water for
listeners,
Chocolate.
Carolyn, once again, laying it down for us.
Yeah, he also directed A Walk in the Clouds, which is a kind of cheesy romance with Keanu Reeves and the late Anthony Quinn. Anyway, so he was a filmmaker, and so it's I think purely as a presence in the film, he is a delight.
Absolutely, he's having so much fun.
Exactly,
with that role.
He just exudes so much joy, and he's just, for him, it's just this big adventure. So I really like his presence in this film, but I do hate the way that that he and all the other men in that village are basically presented as people who would just as soon have killed these people, but for the fact that she happens to be a novelist that he surprisingly admires, the drug lord who loves the romance novels, right?
Exactly, ha ha ha, right?
Yeah,
and he says to the guys, this is the person who writes the books I read to you on Saturdays,
exactly.
Right? And of course, we've been prepped for this because her editor in New York has said, "Oh, your books do incredibly well in those macho countries."
That's right. I'd forgotten. I didn't make that connection. That's a good observation.
Which is another way, kind of a backhanded compliment to both the romance genre again, as if the kind of, alpha fantasies that you have constructed here, find fertile soil in those macho countries.
Yeah.
I thought as in that scene when, he says, Joan Wilder, the Joan Wilder, I was like, it'd make an interesting double bill is if you did Romancing the Stone back to back with Misery, because it always cracks me up when a narrative turns on an author being recognized. Their name, they just happen to be someplace, some small town, and it's like, oh my God, Carolyn Petit, the Carolyn Petit, right?
Yeah,
because it is such a writer's fantasy that there are people out there who worship every word you produce.
Right.
I love that particular kind of trope when it appears. I absolutely love it.
I'm conflicted about this film in some ways. The sense in which I'm conflicted about it primarily. Also no. Before I want to say so. As I mentioned earlier, how this film has doesn't care one whit about explaining anything. So the stone itself, El Corazon, what the fuck? You have this treasure map sent to Joan that looks like an ancient map to some perhaps ancient treasure, right? And yet when they get to the stone itself. the cave, and the map has this cool thing where by, folding it, Joan realizes like, more information about where the stone is. But then when they find the stone, it's in like like an obviously like a cheap ceramic like Easter bunny statue or something, and it's like, what the like how what like what how huh like.
Oh my God, I love buried, like the whole idea of buried treasure cracks me up because I'm like, what is happening with this treasure? Like with people who have treasure, whether it's like treasure hunters or pirates or whatever, that they're like, okay, the heat's on. I gotta hide this treasure. I'll come back for it later, but I'm not just gonna hide it. I'm gonna hide it and then write this incredibly elaborate series of clues.
Yeah,
that no one will be able. Like, I love the idea that in the cinematic universe, this happens fairly frequently. Like, if you have a treasure, you also have to be a good riddle maker. You have to be a great artist because you can't just come up with some like bootleg dollar store treasure map. That shit's gotta, befuddle people for centuries. And so the fact that we don't know, like, what is El Corazon? Who placed it there? Why did they drop? Who is Eduardo, Joan's brother-in-law? Was he a treasure hunter?
Yeah.
Why did he send her the map? Why are these people on his? Like, we never get any explanation for that whatsoever. The movie's just like, deal with it. Just deal with it.
The thing that I think makes me somewhat conflicted about this film is that as much as I recognize the sort of the pillaging and the imperialism of this film about white people going to Colombia and its racist portrayals and all of that, it's like some of the imagery in this film, and maybe it's specifically because I saw this film when I was quite young and it made a real impression on me. But like, there's still, there's that part of me that hungers for a kind of adventure, and sometimes the images of that adventure in my fantasies will look like, a crashed plane in an overgrown jungle, right? I mean, that, like, I love that location where there's just the rain falling right outside the fuselage of the plane, and and so other things like that too. I mean, like, those things they speak to my yearning for more of these kinds of swashbuckling adventure stories. So it's like, how do we divorce the like, the swing across rivers and the sort of dilapidated beauty of like things that have fallen out of use or crashed planes in the jungle or whatever, from the like all the fucked up stuff that they so often tend to be inextricably tied up with in these kinds of stories. So I mean, I think a lot about there's the very popular series of Uncharted video games that primarily star this white dude Nathan Drake, and there's something appealing certainly about their treasure hunting adventures, but you also can't escape from the fact that they go to these places, they get caught up in these action sequences that leave tremendous destruction in their wake, and then these white people just like laugh off the fun that they had on that adventure and move on to the next stage of their journey, and with no care whatsoever for the people, the native people who live in those places, and all the like the rebuilding and everything that they have to do. It's like, so
well, that's what they call collateral damage, Kara. When the bus that Joan Wilder is on crashes, which sets off the adventure of this movie. Of course, that bus is packed full of people who are trying to get to their destination.
That's right.
We never see those people again. Who cares about the adventures of their lives? The important thing is we follow the white people who have come to a grown-up version of Chuck E. Cheese to have an adventure and win a prize. So Having said that, okay, let's finish up with the return of Freakcast Recast. Now, if you listen to our very first episode on the cult classic Highlander, which if you haven't, go back and listen to it, we imagined who we might cast in a current day remake. Now, the studios are banging on our doors, demanding our insights into who they should cast in a remake of Romancing the Stone. Carolyn, who do you got?
So I would, in the sort of lead female role, the sort of Joan Wilder equivalent role, somebody who I think has the charisma to be the kind of, attractive, leading woman that a story like this requires, who also has, I think, the comedic chops to be kind of goofy, and to be endearing and all the things that a character like this needs. I would cast Kelly Marie Tran. Yeah. Better known probably to a lot of people as Rose from The Last Jedi. I think that was like a real kind of star-making performance, and I could definitely see her in this, the kind of, I think she could do the kind of, befuddled or like overwhelmed, thing pretty well, but also then like the coming into her own, and finding her own kind of strength and stuff. So because I definitely would want this remake to pointedly address the issues that so often exist in these stories, as Jack, my pick, at least right now, and this definitely probably has something to do with my just having seen Solo recently, but we're going to talk about that on an upcoming FFR, I'm sure. But, I don't have a whole lot of kind things to say about that film, but I did think that Donald Glover was just exceptional as Lando Calrissian, and I think that even Lando is obviously the more smooth, suave type of scoundrel figure, to Han's more like brash, unrefined, I guess, scoundrel figure. But I definitely I can see in Donald Glover the potential to to have that complexity of like being kind of self-serving, also wanting to be the good guy maybe, and just playing all those kind of facets of a character. So I would love to see him in the kind of the Jack equivalent role, and I think that with potentially say with an Asian woman and a black man in whatever and I haven't thought through like where would their adventure be set. It doesn't have to be Colombia, but I mean obviously it has to take place somewhere. That I think that their quest could raise questions and even had conversations or remarks about how like how white people have definitely like colonized and pillaged and all these cultures, and let's not do that exact thing if we can help it.
That is an amazing tagline for a movie. Let's not do that exact thing.
Yeah. And lastly, this one I'm a little iffier about, but I would like to give him a chance at least to audition for the role. So for the Ralph. Why do I keep forgetting his name? Is it Ralph, the Danny DeVito character?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I want someone funny, someone who can definitely seem like uncomfortable with what they're having to do in and after watching his latest comedy special where I would want to audition Hari Kondabolu for that role. Yeah.
There was no way in which I was prepared for that Freecast recast.
I was
surprised by it at every level.
All right, thank you.
I love it. All
right.
Okay, so my version of this film takes a guy who's, he's got some age to him now. He's certainly got an edge to him now that I don't think he was allowed to have when he was younger. Playing kind of the feckless role in a lot of pictures, but Jack Colton, I'm casting Mr. Keanu Reeves.
Oh!
I think the guy is incredibly charming. He does comedy well.
Yes!
Obviously is amazing for action.
Ebony,
So I'm choosing Keanu Reeves.
Shut up and take my money.
Yeah, that's right.
That is an inspired casting choice.
Thank you very much. For Joan Wilder, I wanted to go with someone who is... I'm playing with the whole idea that, because Joan Wilder, as you say, like, is herself an absolutely beautiful woman. Like, as played by Kathleen Turner, like, she's absolutely beautiful.
Sure.
But someone who, can play kind of quiet, learned helplessness that Joan, inhabits during part of this movie, but then is able to bust out and be fierce as needed. So for Joan Wilder, I'm choosing Kerry Washington, best known to people from Scandal.
Yeah. Yeah.
As Ralph, I would like to offer Seth Green, who's got that kind of impish comedy. He's also a very small man. So I'm offering Seth Green in that. And then for Zolo.
Oh, I didn't think about this.
Check this out, right?
Yeah.
I'm moving the movie from Colombia to Russia.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Moving it to Russia. And now, this is a deep cut.
Okay.
This guy has terrified me since I saw him on Lost, playing the role of Martin Keamy, who was like this paramilitary guy. It's this, I think he's Canadian, this actor named Kevin Durand. He's like 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
And just, IMDb the dude. He is so menacing.
Right.
So menacing. So I'm choosing Kevin Durand as my Zolo.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I like it.
I wasn't in love with the original version, but I'm kind of in love with my remake of it. If they redo it with these people, with your cast either, I'm ready to pay for it.
I think I definitely, it's like I could see so much potential in a remake or update of this kind of story to subvert a lot of the elements that in, this version go unremarked upon, right?
Yeah, and I do find it very interesting that the both of us, when recast the main roles with people of color. I mean, I know, Keanu Reeves occupies this kind of, ambiguous space for a lot of folks, but remember, Keanu Reeves is a person of color, with an Asian background. So I find it very interesting that we both did that.
Yeah.
All right. It is time for us now to render our verdicts on this film using my brother's patented 100-star scale. On each episode, we rate the films we watch, and then we'll keep a list of our ratings in a document you can find in the podcast description. Carolyn, where do you rank Romancing the Stone?
So this was tough, right? Because it's one of those films that, I wish I could sort of say, well, in terms of imagery and an adventurous spirit, I give it a 70, but in terms of like race representations and like themes, I give it like a 10 or something like that. So I'm always going to have a bit of there's going to be a certain fondness for aspects of this film in my heart because that is down to me first encountering it when I was a younger person and not having the critical faculties to consider its various elements and just kind of enjoying it as purely as like a romantic adventure film and kind of wanting to be Joan to some degree, wanting to get swept up in some kind of grand adventure. So I guess just to take all those elements and mash them together, I'm just gonna go right down the line and give it a 50.
That is amazingly close to what I was doing because I had exactly the same response, which is that on a purely, technical level, the film is very well put together. It's got an incredibly tight script.
I think the leads have great chemistry with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to like the actual work of acting their asses off, Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, Danny DeVito, they are putting in the work on this film. And as I said, Danny DeVito is just a delight to watch in all of his scenes, despite being, saying some racist stuff, some homophobic stuff, like the
homophobic joke. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Oh, but I cannot get past the the white person's playground of this movie.
Nor should you.
Yeah, so I'm giving it a 50, and that's being generous because there were parts of this movie where I just wanted to turn it off, where I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's not 1984. I can't, and I'm not a kid. I can't watch this stuff and pretend I don't know what I know. So
absolutely.
Anyway, that's what's up.
That brings Romancing the Stone to a close, which means, Ebony, that it's time for you to reveal what we are watching for next week's episode. How are we connecting from Romancing the Stone? Talk us through it here.
Now, I wanted to go 3 different ways with this. Now, as you will recall, I hit you up earlier in the week and said, hey, I'm thinking about, giving you an easy layup so that you can end this round of Cinemaball quickly
and our
if you
suffering.
Want.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. I decided, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that because I enjoy this too much.
Yeah.
It is the highlight of my week. As far as I'm concerned, this round can go on forever. So
I won't let that happen. You have my word. I will not let that happen.
Once I made that determination, I thought briefly about going for a linkage through Alan Silvestri, who, as you noted, does the music for them, right? And so has been part of some really amazing, very interesting films over the course of his career. I wasn't necessarily going to choose the more interesting ones. I did want it to be a little bit painful and a little bit funny. So for a second, I actually did toy with the idea of the 1995 film Judge Dredd.
Oh my God!
But ultimately, I did not do that either. What did I choose? I decided I'm going to be selfish. As always.
Yeah, typical Ebony.
I know, right? I am linking Romancing the Stone, which starred and was produced by Michael Douglas, with another film in which he starred and produced, 1979 James Bridger film, The China Syndrome. So good!
Oh my God!
So good.
All right.
So good.
I think that is a film that I have seen images and scenes from, but I honestly don't think I've ever seen it. So this will be a new experience.
You are really going to love it, and I'm glad to be able to introduce it because it just makes it that much easier for me to get you to agree to a podcast mini series where we just talk about Alan J. Pakula, political thrillers.
Yeah.
So this is our smooth entry into that. So for next week, join us. I think if you have the opportunity, you definitely want to check out The China Syndrome before we have our conversation. Not because we're going to be spoiling it, but because it is a real treat, and you're going to want to, get into the thicket with us when we unpack that film.
Awesome.
So, yeah, that is going to do it for us this week, folks. Thank you so much to Simplecast, which hosts both this podcast and our flagship show, Feminist Frequency Radio. We will see you back here next week for another round of Cinemaball.
Later.